The title of today's story is The True Secret of the Book of Enoch, Angels, Giants, and the Lost Truth of the Rebellion in the Sky. These chapters, which have reached us from the Book of Enoch, recount humanity's oldest and deepest confrontation with knowledge. Before we begin, I have one more small request for you. I would be very happy if you would write the date and time of your location in the comments, because this way, we can forge a beautiful connection between us and you, our valuable listeners from different corners of the world. If you're ready, let's now embark on this long journey and listen to the story of forbidden knowledge together. I want you to close your eyes and transport yourself thousands of years into the past. You are in a silent room. The walls are stone, the floor is earth, and small oil lamps flicker in the corners. Flames dance, shadows ripple across the walls. In the center of the room is a low table. On the table are parchments, reed pens, and small pots filled with black ink. This room might seem ordinary to you, but it was here that one of humanity's most mysterious texts was born, the Book of Enoch. Today, this book might seem like a mysterious text to you, speaking of angels, giants, and a rebellion in the sky. But when its first lines were written, nothing was epic. Those lines were part of a task as mundane as village tax lists, as technical as temple records. Because the Book of Enoch is not primarily a product of faith, but a product of writing. And writing took shape in the hands of silent, invisible scribes. Who were these people we call scribes? Most were individuals who worked in small rooms in their villages, both writing and tilling the fields. There were those who could write outside of the great temple in Jerusalem. This knowledge, passed down from father to son, served daily needs. If someone filed a lawsuit, the scribe would put it in writing. If a marriage contract was to be made in a village, the scribe would write it. And these very scribes recorded not only contracts, but also texts concerning the heavens. Papyrus was expensive, often coming from Egypt. Therefore, texts were generally written on parchments made from animal skin. The skin of a goat, or sheep, would be salted for days, stretched, and scraped to make it suitable for writing. That's why every letter was valuable. If a mistake was made, the page wasn't discarded. It was scraped off with a small knife and rewritten. In the silent room, only the sound of this scraping, and then the rustle of the reed pen, could be heard. The ink was not ordinary either. Scribes mixed gallnut essence with iron salts to prepare a black and permanent ink. This ink would initially appear gray, then darken and penetrate the parchment. Their hands were always stained black. Traces of this ink would remain under the scribe's fingernails, so much so that in some tomes, these marks are still visible. Now, think, in a village, knowing when it would rain was vital. Sowing seeds, harvesting, taxes, everything depended on it. This is where the Book of Enoch comes in, because the book contains not only angels and giants, but also the order of the sun, moon, and stars. That information was a guide for life for the villagers. When a scribe read a text, it was both a celestial secret and a roadmap for daily life. Today, you might know the Book of Enoch as a forbidden text. But in those times, this text was intertwined with daily tasks. For example, a villager would go to the scribe and ask, "When will the rains come this year?" The scribe would read the movements of the stars and the lines of the book, reminding them of the calendar. Thus, the divine and the mundane converged on the same table. The scribes who wrote these texts did not see themselves as heroes. Their only job was to write in silence. But it was precisely this silence that left the greatest imprints on history. The names of kings and wars are often mentioned, but texts like the Book of Enoch are the product of silent people. We don't know their names, but thanks to their labor, we can read these mysterious stories about the sky today. Fragments of the Book of Enoch were found in different places. Hebrew fragments in the Qumran caves, some parts in Greek, Gaia's translations in Ethiopia. All different, yet stemming from the same root, and that root is hidden in the pens of these nameless people who wrote in these silent rooms. Perhaps the true secret of the Book of Enoch lies not, as you might think, in the angels' rebellion against heaven, but in the patience of these ordinary people. Because even amidst the monotony of daily life, they tried to bring order to the sky. In every line, they shaped not only their own era, but also the beliefs of the future. But now, I want to leave you with a question. If the Book of Enoch was born in such ordinary, everyday workshops, what made it secret and forbidden? Was it the details describing the heavens, or its offering to people knowledge beyond limits? Perhaps the real secret is not in the dramatic stories, but in the small lines a scribe wrote by the light of a flickering lamp. I just left you with the question. If the Book of Enoch was born in ordinary workshops, at the hands of ordinary scribes, what made it forbidden or secret? To find the answer to this question, I want to take you a little further back into those times, because it wasn't just those who put the Book of Enoch into writing, but also the communities who read those lines, who gave it meaning. During that period, Jewish society was not confined to a single center. The temple in Jerusalem was powerful, but there were different thought groups around. The Qumran community was one of them. In your eyes, Qumran might just seem like caves where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. But the people living there led their lives with strict rules and discipline. For them, the order of the heavens, the duties of angels, and even the day of the calendar were sacred matters. The Watchers section of the Book of Enoch comes into play precisely here. What was told in this section was this: there were angels in heaven tasked with watching over humanity. But some of these angels descended to earth and taught forbidden knowledge to humans. They taught them how to process metals, make ornaments, use magic and charms, and even the art of warfare. As a result, chaos erupted on earth. This narrative was not an ordinary story. It pointed to a profound danger for the societies of that era. Just think, in an agricultural village, smelting iron to make weapons was not just a technical advancement, but something that shifted power balances. If one tribe could make better weapons than another, it gained superiority. The Book of Enoch placed these developments within a celestial framework. That is, every technical change in society was actually the work of disobedient angels in heaven. This perspective was disturbing for official authorities, because power should only be in the hands of the temple and kings. If people started shaping their own lives by reading forbidden knowledge from heaven, order would break down. Perhaps that is why the Book of Enoch was cast a seed and not included in official texts. For the scribes, the situation was more complex. They merely duplicated the writing. But as they wrote each line, they knew this. These words would change someone's mind in the future. That's why they sometimes carefully jotted down small notes in the margins. The marginal notes seen in some Enoch fragments we have today are traces of these silent warnings. It might seem ordinary to you, but a scribe's mind was constantly grappling with this dilemma. Should I write it, or should I not? If I write it, this knowledge will spread. If I don't write it, this knowledge will be lost. Scribes held not only reed pens, but also responsibility in their hands. That's why some texts remained within small communities while others were forgotten over time. Here, I want you to pay attention to a small detail. Fragments of the Book of Enoch were found in different languages: Aramaic, Greek, Ge'ez. This diversity shows that the text spread from different communities, not from a single center. That is, each community adapted this book according to its own needs. Some emphasized the calendars of the heavens, others the story of the fallen angels. This also explains why the book could not be forced into a single official form. But still, a question remains. Why did some people care so much about preserving this text? The answer might be hidden here. The Book of Enoch reminded people that there was another order behind the existing order. There was a reality beyond what the temple, kings, or tax collectors told. Secrets about the heavens gave ordinary people in society a sense of power. They believed that by looking at the sky, they could see not only the rising of the moon, but also the order of the angels. Every line written by the scribes in their silent rooms reinforced this belief. Words written by the flickering light of an oil lamp gave hope to an ordinary villager. Your life is not limited by the decisions of kings alone. There is also an accounting in heaven. At this point, the Book of Enoch became a book for ordinary people. For the authorities, this was dangerous, but for the public, it was a source of support. And the scribes continued to exist in this dilemma. But now I want you to think, if this text was so important in the hands of ordinary people, why have only fragments of it survived to our day? Why was it completely lost or hidden? Perhaps the answer should again be sought in those silent rooms. A scribe, in the middle of the night, finished a parchment and put it on a shelf. Years later, that parchment was hidden in a cave. But perhaps another scribe decided to burn the same text, because for him, these lines were dangerous. Now I'm leaving you with another question. Was the true secret of the Book of Enoch really hidden in the rebellion of angels in heaven, or in humanity's habit of concealing and selecting knowledge? Perhaps the real secret lies not within the lines themselves, but in whether those lines were preserved or not. Now let's continue from where we left off. I asked you, the lines of the Book of Enoch not only reveal the secrets of the heavens, but also the tension between preserving and destroying knowledge. Every line written in silent rooms is a trace left in the memory of the future, or sometimes consciously erased. I want to look a little closer at the world of scribes. Imagine an ordinary scribe living in a village, waking up before sunrise. First, they helped their family, watering the animals, checking the grain storage, sweeping the front of the house. These tasks were ordinary, but necessary. Then they retreat to their small room. There's a half-finished parchment on the table. They started writing last night by the flickering light of an oil lamp. Today they will continue. Perhaps they are copying lines describing the order of the heavens, or perhaps the fall of the Watchers. But writing was not just a job. It was also a test of patience. The tip of the pen would quickly dull. The ink would dry quickly. The surface of the parchment was sometimes rough, causing the writing to slip. So the scribe often had to stop, take out their knife, and rejut the tip. These small details might seem tedious to you, but it was within this tedium that the Book of Enoch took shape. Copying texts was also not easy. In a village, only a few parchments would be found, so a scribe had to write the same text many times over. Sometimes they would take on an apprentice. The apprentice would read aloud, and the scribe would write. This way, Errors were reduced, and the apprentice would learn to write. Thus, the Book of Enoch was transmitted not only through written lines, but also by word of mouth. Now think, what were the ways to preserve these texts? Often, parchments were stored in clay jars. They needed to be protected from moisture, insects, and fire. But still, most of the time, they perished. Hundreds of fragments were lost due to wars, migrations, and fires. Today, we only have fragments, but even those fragments whisper the patience of the scribes to us. Another aspect of the Book of Enoch was this: because it was not included among the official texts, it could be altered more freely. One community made additions according to its own understanding of the book. Another community removed certain sections. That's why today we see different versions. This diversity shows that the book was not forbidden, but rather a marginal text, outside the mainstream, but not entirely forgotten. This marginality was very important in the world of scribes, because they had to be careful when writing official temple texts. But in texts like Enoch, they were freer. They could write comments in the margins, add small warnings. Some notes contain phrases like, "Not everyone should know this." This shows us that they were discussing the limits of knowledge. The influence of the Book of Enoch in daily life was also different. In a village, a father might quote Enoch when teaching his son the movement of the stars. A mother might remind her daughter that certain ornaments were forbidden by the angels. Thus, the book circulated not only in written, but also in oral culture. Today, these details might seem small to you, but in fact, it is precisely these small details that shape the course of history. A single line written by a scribe reappeared centuries later on a shelf in a church in Ethiopia. A sentence a mother told her daughter was passed down from generation to generation and resonated in another culture. There's something else here. The Book of Enoch was not just a religious text. It was also a matter of identity. When a community wanted to see itself as different from the official religion, it embraced Enoch, because this book told things that were not in the official texts. The fall of angels, the birth of giants, the giving of forbidden knowledge to humans, these were outside of official theology. But precisely for this reason, they gave communities a distinct power. Every line written in the scribes' workshops was, in fact, an expression of a kind of resistance, a silent, small, but meaningful resistance. They interpreted the heavens with their own eyes, trying to transcend the boundaries drawn by official authority. And this resistance, line by line, parchment by parchment, reached us. Now I want to close this section by asking you this question: was the true importance of the Book of Enoch in the rebellion of angels in heaven, or in the lines patiently written by ordinary people on earth? Perhaps the real secret lies not in looking up, but in learning to look down, because sometimes the greatest mysteries are born in the quietest hands. I want you to lift your head and look at the night sky. Imagine you are in a quiet village. There are no artificial lights around, only the sky, the sparkle of the stars, and the pale light of the moon. At that moment, you realize that the sky is not just a landscape. The sky is like a calendar, a guide, a book that determines the order of life. Thousands of years ago, people looked at the sky in this way. Every star, every phase of the moon, every sunrise had a meaning, and beings who preserved and watched over this meaning were spoken of, the Watchers. The Watchers are described in the Book of Enoch as celestial beings. Their duty was to observe the heavens, watch over humanity, and maintain order. But to understand this concept, you must first know this. For the people of that era, the word watcher also referred to the people themselves who followed the sky. In a village, there was a person who first noticed the crescent moon. That person would announce the date of the festival. This was not something that could tolerate error, because a wrong calculation could disrupt the order of the entire village. This person was the watcher of the community. In another village, there was an old man who observed the sunrise. He would tell them which day to sow, which day to begin the harvest, because he had been observing the sky for years. He, too, was a watcher. Now imagine, at night, people gathered in the village square. Everyone is looking at the sky. Children ask, "Why do the stars move?" An elder replies, "The watchers record them. They know the order." So the watchers were part of this daily life, but the Book of Enoch attributed another meaning to the watchers. These beings did not just observe. They descended to earth, and they taught forbidden knowledge to humans. Just think. They taught people how to work metals. Iron was smelted. Swords were made. Now, one tribe could gain superiority over another. This, though it seemed like a small technical advancement, actually changed all the balances of society. Not only that, the watchers taught how to make ornaments and how to use spells and charms. Women used eye paint for the first time. Men made stronger weapons. War, ostentation, and fear entered life. When you hear this now, it might sound like an ordinary story, but for the people of that time, these developments were frightening, because knowledge was spreading uncontrollably. Knowledge was power, but it was also chaos. The story of the fall of the Watchers gains meaning precisely at this point. They were tasked with maintaining order, but they crossed the line. They were not content with observing. They intervened. They gave humanity what was forbidden. And because of this, chaos was born. Now let's return to daily life. A mother, putting her child to sleep, points to the sky. "Look," she says, "the stars are changing. The watchers are recording them." The child grows up with these words. In their mind, the watchers become both beings who observe the sky and carriers of forbidden knowledge. A farmer looks at the sunrise in the morning. He determines the time for irrigation accordingly. He is actually acting as a watcher, because he connects life with the sky. A scribe writes the movements of the moon on his parchment, but he adds a small note in the margins. This is the secret of the watchers. Thus, observing the sky becomes not just an astronomical task, but also a sacred duty. To you today, this might seem ordinary, but in that era, observing the sky was a matter of life and death, because seeds sown at the wrong time would wither. A festival held on the wrong day would disrupt the order of society and cause arguments. The concept of watchers, therefore, carries a twofold meaning. On one hand, they were symbols of order. On the other hand, they were sources of chaos, because knowledge was not always used in an orderly manner. Here I want you to ask yourself this question: were the watchers truly celestial beings? Or were they a symbol of humanity's own power of observation? Perhaps what is described in the Book of Enoch was actually a reflection of humanity's hunger for knowledge. Humanity wanted to understand order by looking at the sky, but at the same time, it also sought the power to disrupt that order. The Watchers were precisely the figures of this dilemma, both hope and fear, both order and chaos. And this duality was felt even in the most ordinary moments of daily life. In the farmer's field, in the mother's words, in the scribe's lines. The watchers were not only in the sky, but everywhere. So now I leave you with one more question. If the Watchers were just symbols, what truly made them fallen angels? Was it knowledge itself, or how humanity used it? I just left you with a question. Were the Watchers truly celestial beings, or were they a symbol of humanity's own power of observation? Now, as we seek the answer to this question, I want to take you a little deeper into daily life. Because the power of the Watcher idea stemmed not only from celestial beings, but also from the world humanity lived in. Imagine an ordinary farmer living in a village. For him, the sky was not just stars. The sky was the guarantee of his bread, his water, his life. Seeing the crescent moon meant knowing when the rain would come. The shifting of the stars indicated that it was time for sowing. Without these observations, a society could not survive. That's why the story of the Watchers held a very real place in the villager's life. But the Book of Enoch took this reality and placed it in a broader framework. The Watchers were not just individuals observing the stars. They were also divine beings tasked with maintaining the order of heaven. And this is where the real problem began. Because these beings abandoned their duties and crossed the line. They taught humans what was forbidden. Now just think. In a village, ornaments start being made for the first time. Women use eye paint. Men work with new metals. While these might seem like innovations, they create a fracture in society. Because ornamentation brings ostentation. Metal strengthens warfare. And people are no longer content with the old order. The Book of Enoch explained this change through the fall of the Watchers. A mother warns her daughter, seeing ornaments as forbidden. These are what the Watchers taught. A father shows his son a weapon and whispers, "This power is the price of knowledge from heaven." Thus, the Watchers become a moral benchmark in daily life. The scribes knew this too. While recording the movements of the sky, they also embedded these warnings in their lines. What they wrote was not just a calendar. It was also advice, a reminder. Observe the order, but do not cross the line. The fall of the Watchers was, in fact, the fall of knowledge. Because knowledge, in human hands, produced different outcomes. On one hand, it preserved order. On the other, it followed chaos. And people were caught in the middle of this dilemma. Now I want to take you back to a village evening. People are sitting around a fire, looking at the sky. An elder tells the children this story. Once there were Watchers. They descended from heaven and taught humans things they didn't know. But this knowledge, as much as it empowered humans, also corrupted them. The children grow up listening to this story. The Watchers become figures both sacred and dangerous in their minds. Thus, the concept of the Watcher became not just a theological idea, but a part of daily life. As people observed the sky, they remembered the Watchers. As new knowledge emerged, they thought about the Watchers' forbidden teachings. But now, I want to leave you with another question. If the Watchers were symbols of order, why were they also described as figures who disrupted order? The answer to this contradiction might be hidden in human nature itself. Humanity was like the Watchers. While wanting to see order, it was also prone to crossing boundaries. The Watchers were like humanity's own mirror. The story told in the heavens was actually a reflection of the reality experienced on earth. Now let's continue from where we left off. I asked you, if the Watchers were symbols of order, why were they also described as figures who disrupted order? As we seek the answer to this question, we need to think a little more closely about how the concept of the Watcher lived in daily life and how it was reflected in people. Imagine you live in a village. Days are spent working the fields and caring for animals. When night falls, the sky is your only guide. Observing the position of the stars and the phase of the moon determines your life. The Watchers were at the very center of this life. But at the same time, their story carried a warning, because the Watchers had not only maintained order, but had also crossed boundaries. The forbidden knowledge described in the Book of Enoch was felt every day in society, working with iron, making ornaments, learning spells. These were not ordinary innovations. When an iron tool first appeared in a village, it was not merely a sturdier implement, but also implied a new superiority, and this superiority created conflict among communities. Thus, the Watchers were the celestial explanation for this transformation. But think, the Watchers didn't just represent danger. They also broadened humanity's horizons. They brought new knowledge to people. Humanity believed it had transcended its limits thanks to the Watchers. However, crossing limits also brought risks. This duality was at the heart of the Watcher stories. A mother would remind her daughter of the Watchers when forbidding her to adorn herself. A father, showing his son a new weapon, would whisper that its origin was forbidden knowledge. A scribe, writing the movement of the stars on his parchment, would add a small warning in the margin. This is the secret of the Watchers. Thus, the Watchers continued to exist in every corner of life. You might be asking now, if the Watchers were so important, why were they forgotten over time? Why were they not included in the official sacred texts? Perhaps the answer is this: the Watchers reminded people of too much. They represented both the beneficial and destructive sides of knowledge. For official authorities, this was dangerous, because those who wanted to maintain order had to define the boundaries of knowledge. But for the common people, the situation was different. They did not forget the Watchers. They kept them alive in their daily lives. When they looked at the sky, they imagined the Watchers silently watching them. When they encountered new knowledge, they debated whether it was a gift or a curse from the Watchers. Thus, the Watchers continued to live outside official history, but in the memory of the people. They represented humanity's most fundamental tension, seeing order and simultaneously crossing boundaries. Now, as I conclude this section, I want to ask you this question: were the Watchers truly celestial beings, or were they a reflection of humanity's own inner desires? Did they truly descend from heaven, or did humanity's hunger for knowledge project them onto the sky? Perhaps the greatest secret of the Watchers is hidden here. They were a mirror of humanity's own story. What was seen in heaven was not just the stars. What was seen in heaven was humanity's own search for order and fear of chaos. I want you to close your eyes and let yourself drift into a night covered with stars. There is no noise around you. There is only a landscape where the moonlight illuminates the earth and the stars silently flicker. Humanity has looked at this sky for thousands of years and asked, who is there? Only stars or other beings watching us? The Book of Enoch gave a completely different answer to this question. We were not alone in the sky. There were beings watching us, maintaining order, and knowing secrets. They were called Watchers. But these Watchers did not just stay in heaven. One day, they descended to earth. And that descent created a rift in humanity's memory that was never forgotten. The Book of Enoch describes this descent in detail. The Watchers were initially obligated only to observe. Their duty was to follow the order without interfering with humans. But at some point, humans became attractive to them. Especially the beauty of women caught the attention of the Watchers. And so, the boundary between heaven and earth was crossed. The Watchers descended to earth and interacted with humans. This story might seem mythological to you, but for the people of that time, This was how they made sense of the changes they were experiencing. Because the descent of the Watchers was actually a symbolic expression of humanity's encounter with new knowledge. For a person living in a village, this narrative was very concrete. Women starting to adorn themselves using eye paints or wearing gold jewelry were seen not as ordinary fashion, but as a sign of forbidden knowledge from heaven. Similarly, men processing new metals and learning to make weapons were explained by what the Watchers taught. Thus, every new development in society was linked to a story from heaven. Just imagine, for the first time, an iron knife appears in a village. This knife is harder, more durable, sharper. Everyone understands that it is different, but this difference also creates fear. Because if this power is in one person's hands, others will be left behind. In such a situation, people linked the source of this innovation to the Watchers. They had descended to earth and taught humans what was forbidden. The Watchers taught not only how to make tools, but also spells and charms. People began to influence each other with words they had not known before. For some, this was hope. For others, it was fear. Because the power of words was no longer just among humans. Thanks to the Watchers, it was believed that words had a celestial equivalent. The biggest consequence of this descent was the children of the Watchers. From the union of humans and Watchers, giants were born. These giants were larger, stronger, and more destructive than humans. They became the concrete symbol of fear in societies. When a village was flooded, a wall collapsed, or a disaster occurred, people attributed it to the curse of the giants. Thus, the descent of the Watchers became an explanation for experienced calamities, not just a fable. The scribes sitting in their silent rooms put these stories into writing, line by line. Their job was not only to write, it was also to record the changes taking place in society, working metals, making ornaments, learning new knowledge. All of these were the realities of daily life. But these realities gained meaning by being connected to a story from heaven. In every line, the scribes were embedding this message. Knowledge is dangerous. If you cross the line, the fall begins. What happened to the Watchers can also happen to humanity. That is why the descent of the Watchers was not just a celestial rebellion, but also a warning to humanity. When humanity encountered knowledge, it gained power, but also took risks. The Watchers became symbols of this dilemma. They gave both hope and fear. Now, I want you to think, if the Watchers really descended to Earth, how did the knowledge they taught change humanity's destiny? And if this is just a symbolic narrative, then what was the real message? Perhaps the Watchers did not descend from heaven. Perhaps the Watchers were merely a projection of humanity's own curiosity and desire onto the heavens. When a new tool was made in a village, when a new ornament appeared, people explained it with a story from heaven, because this way, the weight of change became bearable. The descent of the Watchers actually showed humanity's relationship with boundaries. Humanity wanted to see order by looking at the sky, but at the same time, it wanted to cross boundaries, to learn what was forbidden. The Watchers were a mirror of this desire. Their descent was a celestial metaphor for humanity's hunger for knowledge. But as I conclude this section, I want to leave you with one more question. Was the descent of the Watchers truly a celestial curse, or was it the inevitable result of humanity's own inner quest? Perhaps what was seen when looking at the sky was not just the stars. Perhaps what was seen when looking at the sky were humanity's own desiras. And the story of the Watchers was the shadow of these Desiris falling from heaven. We talked about the descent of the Watchers to earth. You remember how they taught forbidden knowledge to humans, and how this knowledge changed communities. But the story doesn't end there, because the fall of the Watchers was not limited to descending from heaven to earth. Their trages created deep fissures in people's daily lives and memories. These fissures remained in humanity's memory for centuries and were passed down from generation to generation. For an ordinary person living in a village, the descent of the Watchers was not a distant legend, but a concrete explanation of life. Lack of rain, drying of the soil, outbreak of wars, or unrest within the family. All of these were associated with what the Watchers had taught. People made sense of what was happening in their lives through the shadow of these beings who descended from heaven. That is why the descent of the Watchers was not just a celestial story, but a guide for daily life. Consider the fairy tale a mother tells her children as she puts them to bed. She whispers to her child how the Watchers brought forbidden knowledge. The child falls asleep with this story. In their mind, the angels who descended from heaven become not just distant beings, but daily life's cautionary figures. A father shows his son a new weapon. He tells his son that the source of this weapon is knowledge from heaven. Thus, the descent of the Watchers becomes a teaching tool even within the family. But the descent of the Watchers was not only about knowledge. The giants born from their descent to earth were also etched into society's memory. These giants were different from humans. They were stronger, more destructive, and insatiable. The Book of Enoch describes these giants as the cause of great chaos on earth. They consumed people's produce, occupied their lands, and overturned order. This narrative was a symbolic expression of the calamities experienced by the people. When there was a flood, a wall collapsed, or a famine occurred, people explained it with the shadow of the giants. The descent of the Watchers thus became an explanation for daily fears. This story was put into writing by the hands of scribes. For them, the descent of the Watchers was not just a religious narrative, but also a reflection of social order. The written lines contain not only celestial events, but also people's own experiences, because writing was also about preserving memory. While writing the story of the Watchers, the scribes were actually recording their community's fears, hopes, and the changes they experienced. A parchment on a scribe's table was not just a text. It was the materialist form of a society's memory. Now imagine you are sitting in a village. People around you are looking at the sky. The moonlight illuminates the ground. At that moment, an elder begins to tell the story of the Watchers. People fall silent. Children listen carefully, their eyes wide open. The elder tells how the angels who descended from heaven gave forbidden knowledge to humans. Everyone listening to that story connects the small details of their own lives with this grand narrative. A woman remembers the Watchers when she adorns herself. A man remembers the Watchers when he takes up his weapon. A child remembers the Watchers when looking at the stars. Thus, the descent of the Watchers becomes a constantly living story in people's minds. But there was another side to this story. The Watchers were not only carriers of knowledge, but also symbols of crossing boundaries. Their fall reminded humanity of this. If you cross the line, order breaks down. This message was constantly repeated in daily life, because society had to keep knowledge under control. If the boundaries of knowledge were not drawn, chaos would knock at the door. The story of the Watchers was where this boundary was drawn. Consider a farmer working in a village. As he sows seeds in the soil, he watches the sky. He determines the time according to the movement of the moon. But he also knows this. If he sows at the wrong time, the crop will be wasted. That is why the Watcher's calendar knowledge was vital for him. But the same farmer also remembers that the Watchers brought forbidden knowledge. So every new piece of information brought both hope and fear. The descent of the Watchers thus represented humanity's contradictory relationship with knowledge. Humanity needed knowledge, but when knowledge crossed boundaries, it created chaos. The Watchers became the celestial symbol of this dilemma. This dilemma is clearly seen in the lines written by the scribes. In some texts, the Watchers' knowledge is described as beneficial, but immediately after, their fall and the birth of the giants are mentioned. This contradiction was actually a reflection of the contradiction humanity experienced with knowledge. Knowledge both sustained and destroyed. The descent of the Watchers also turned into a matter of identity. Different communities embraced this story in different ways. Some adapted the Watchers' knowledge to their own way of life. Others saw their fall as a warning. Thus, the story of the Watchers became not only a religious text, but also an element that shaped the identity of communities. Today, we have different fragments related to the Watchers. Texts found in the Qumran caves, translations preserved in Ethiopia, Greek fragments. All are different but stem from the same root. This diversity shows that the story of the Watchers spread not from a single center, but from different communities. That is, the descent of the Watchers was not a single narrative, but an experience shaped in the memory of different communities. Now, I want to ask you this question. Was the descent of the Watchers to Earth truly a celestial event, or was it humanity's way of explaining the changes it experienced? Perhaps the Watchers did not descend from heaven. Perhaps the Watchers were the symbolic expression of the contradictions humanity experienced when encountering knowledge. When a person made a new tool, used a new ornament, or learned a new spell, they chose to explain it with a story from heaven. Because this way, the burden of change was lightened. The descent of the Watchers became a way of understanding humanity's relationship with knowledge. That descent was a metaphor that combined humanity's search for order with its fear of chaos. When looking at the sky, not only stars, but also humanity's own desiras and boundaries were seen. Now, at the end of this section, I leave you with a calm question. Was the descent of the Watchers truly a curse from heaven, or was it the inevitable result of humanity's inner desire to cross boundaries? Perhaps what you saw when you looked at the sky was not just the stars. Perhaps what you saw when you looked at the sky were the Watchers within humanity itself. We talked about the descent of the Watchers to Earth and their giving forbidden knowledge to humans. Listening to that story, perhaps you also thought, if this knowledge truly made human life easier, why was it described as a curse? The answer to this question lies in the giants, the children of the Watchers, and the chaos they created. For an ordinary person living in a village, the story of the giants was not just a distant legend. They associated the disasters they experienced in their own lives with these giants. If their crops in the fields suddenly vanished, it was the result of the giants' insatiable appetite. If the village was attacked, it was the earthly echo of the giants' power. Giants became the symbol of everything humanity could not control. They were large, powerful, insatiable, and they destroyed human labor. In the Book of Enoch, the existence of giants is described as a natural consequence of the Watchers' fall. The Watchers had crossed the line, uniting with humans. The giants born from this union were a symbol of the complete breakdown of order. That is, The descent of the Watchers resulted not only in knowledge, but also in chaos. Therefore, the story of the Watchers was a warning to humanity. If you cross the line, you bring upon yourself a burden greater than you can bear. This warning was very clear in the lines written by the scribes. They did not present the Watchers' knowledge merely as a beneficial innovation. They also described the consequences of this knowledge, because knowledge, when it crossed boundaries, could become an uncontrolled power. And the story of the giants was precisely the symbol of this uncontrolled power. Now, imagine you are in a scribe's room. An oil lamp flickers with a faint light. The scribe writes on his parchment, "The Watchers descended to earth and united with humans. From them, giants were born." As he wrote these lines, perhaps he was also thinking about the problems he saw in his own society. Perhaps he was associating the hunger in one village or the war in another with this story. The lines he wrote were an explanation not only of the past but also of the present. Think of a village evening. People gathered around a fire. An elder tells the story of the Watchers and the giants. Children open their eyes wide with fear. Women look at each other. Men listen in silence. Because this story resonated in their lives too. The descent of the Watchers and the birth of the giants had become a warning in daily life. People were learning the price of crossing boundaries through these stories. But there was another side to the story. The fall of the Watchers was also related to humanity's own desires and curiosity. Humanity has always been hungry for knowledge. It wanted to learn more. The Watchers were a symbol of this desire. They brought new things to humanity, but they also showed the destructive aspect of this desire. That is why the story of the Watchers was, in fact, a projection of humanity's own inner conflict onto the sky. Consider the fairy tale a mother tells her child. She warns her child not to adorn herself, because adornment was one of the forbidden teachings of the Watchers. A father shows his son a new tool. He tells him that it is useful, but also carries danger, because that tool was a result of the knowledge brought by the Watchers. Thus, the descent of the Watchers turned into moral lessons in daily life. The descent of the Watchers to earth and the birth of the giants found a permanent place in the memory of societies, because these stories did not just explain the past. They were also a way of understanding the present. Humanity, by looking at the sky, saw the boundaries in its own life. The fall of the Watchers reminded humanity, knowledge both saves and destroys. Power both sustains and annihilates. And crossing boundaries always brings a heavy price. Today, as you read these stories, they might seem distant to you, but what they tell is actually very familiar, because humanity is still pursuing the same questions, hungry for knowledge, but also afraid of the risks that knowledge brings. It wants power, but is also concerned about the destructive aspect of power. The descent of the Watchers and the birth of the giants are still meaningful for this reason, because those stories tell of humanity's unchanging contradiction. And now, as I close this section, I leave you with a calm question. Was the descent of the Watchers to earth truly a curse from heaven, or was it the inevitable result of humanity's own inner desires? Did the story of the giants truly come from the lineage of celestial beings, or was it a symbol of humanity's misuse of power? Perhaps what you saw when you looked at the sky was not just the stars. Perhaps what you saw when you looked at the sky was humanity's own fall. I want you to close your eyes and transport yourself thousands of years into the past. Silence surrounds you, but within this silence, you hear footsteps echoing in the depths of the earth. These footsteps do not belong to an ordinary human. They belong to the giants mentioned in the Book of Enoch and other ancient texts. These beings, known by names such as Anakim, Nephilim, or Rephaim, took a permanent place in the memory of peoples as a lasting fear. And this fear was not just a mythological story, but a celestial explanation projected onto the daily experiences of people. According to the Book of Enoch, giants were the children of the Watchers, who descended from heaven and human women. They were not ordinary. They were taller, stronger, and hungrier than humans. They consumed the produce of the fields, devoured people's labor, and disrupted order. Giants became symbols of powers that humanity could not control. When crops withered in a village or food was quickly consumed, people thought of giants as the cause, because such a great loss was not easy to explain otherwise. In the memory of ancient societies, giants were not just a physical fear, but also a moral warning. They were the price of crossing boundaries, of accessing forbidden knowledge. The Watchers had descended from heaven, taught humans what was forbidden, and giants were born as a result of this transgression. So giants were not just powerful creatures living on earth. They were also a reminder. If you cross the line, you leave behind a burden greater than you can bear. In daily life, the stories of giants were passed down from generation to generation. Mothers who wanted to scare their children would tell them how giants attacked villages. Elders would use the greed of giants as an example to teach the young not to cross boundaries. When a wall collapsed in a village or an unexpected disaster occurred, people interpreted it under the shadow of giants. Thus, giants became the concretized form of daily fears. But giants not only caused fear, but also aroused admiration, because they were stronger than humans. Some societies considered the power of giants sacred. They associated them with ancient heroes. That is why the stories of giants became not only a curse, but also an expression of humanity's longing for power. A father, teaching his son to fight, might try to encourage him by speaking of the giant's strength. Thus, the story of giants became a source of both fear and inspiration. This duality is clearly seen in the lines written by the scribes. On the one hand, giants are described as beings who disrupt order and consume humanity. On the other hand, their size and power arouse admiration in the human mind. This contradiction reflects humanity's own contradiction with power. Power is both desired and feared. The story of the giants is a celestial reflection of this contradiction. Today, in the ancient texts we have, giants are referred to by different names: Anakim, Nephilim, Rephaim. These names are different echoes of the same fear in the memory of different societies. All have been seen as the result of humanity crossing boundaries, and all have become a symbol of humanity's inability to cope with its own power. For an ordinary person living in a village, the story of giants was not just an event from the past, but a way of understanding the present, because giants were the symbol of everything humanity could not control. Hunger, war, disaster. All of these were interpreted under the shadow of giants, and this interpretation allowed humanity to understand the boundaries in its life. Now I leave you with a calm question. Did the story of the giants truly belong to the children of celestial beings, or was it a symbol of humanity's misuse of its own power? Perhaps the giants never truly existed. Perhaps they were merely a projection of humanity's own greed, insatiability, and desire for power onto the sky. When you looked at the sky, you saw not only the stars, but also humanity's own shadows, and the giants were the largest of these shadows. The story of the giants was not limited to fear alone. Their existence was also a way for humanity to recognize its own limits. For ordinary people living in a village, giants were figures so incredibly powerful, so immensely large, that they were almost beyond imagination. But at the same time, they were symbols of human greed and insatiability. For in the Book of Enoch, giants are described not only as powerful, but also as insatiable beings. They consumed people's produce, devoured their animals, and, if not satisfied, attacked humans. Thus, their story became a framework through which society made sense of its own fears. When crops failed in a village, people didn't just see it as a whim of nature. They explained this loss with the giant's appetite. When a flood occurred, a wall collapsed, or a war broke out, people saw the shadow of giants behind these events, because giants were the symbol of uncontrollable forces. Uncertainties and disasters in human life were explained by the stories of giants. But the story of the giants was not only about fear. There was also a hidden admiration, because giants were stronger than humans. Their strength, while terrifying for some, was awe-inspiring for others. In the memory of ancient societies, giants were sometimes equated with heroes. Their size and power were something humanity longed for. A father, wanting to give courage to his son, might evoke the power of giants. Thus, the story of the giants became both a threat and an ideal. Scribes put this duality into writing, line by line. When describing giants, they depicted not only chaos, but also humanity's desire for power. Because giants were on one hand a symbol of curse, and on the other hand, a symbol of the power humanity sought to attain. This contradiction actually reflected humanity's relationship with power. Power was both desired and feared. The story of the giants showed this contradiction in a celestial mirror. Today, in the texts we possess, giants are referred to by different names: Anakim, Nephilim, Rephaim. All are echoes of the same fear and the same admiration in the memory of different societies. These different names show that giants became not a single story, but a reality etched into the memory of many communities. They were not just a legend, but a symbolic narrative of the experiences societies lived through. Consider the fairy tale a mother tells her child. To put her child to sleep, she tells how giants attacked villages. The child is scared, but listens with admiration. A father talks about the giant's strength to give courage to his son. The son begins to feel stronger with the power of the giants. Thus, the story of the giants becomes a teaching tool even within the family. But as with every story, there is also a warning here. Giants represent not only power, but also greed. Their insatiability reminds us of humanity's own insatiability. That is why the story of the giants is not just a legend, but also a moral lesson that is kept alive. Humanity desires power, but it also sees the consequences of this desire in the story of the giants. Now, at the end of this section, I want to leave you with a question. Did the story of the giants truly belong to the children of celestial beings, or was it a projection of humanity's own desires and fears onto the heavens? Perhaps the giants never existed. Perhaps they were symbols of humanity's inner greed and insatiability. But one truth remains: the story of the giants was not forgotten for thousands of years. Because those stories told of humanity's unchanging contradiction, the longing for power and the fear that power brings. The story of the giants was remembered in the memory of societies not only with fear and admiration, but also with a search for order. People, looking at the sky, not only saw the stars, but also projected their own uncertainties and boundaries onto it. The giants became the greatest figures of this projection. Their greed reminded societies, if knowledge and power know no bounds, the result is destruction. Imagine you live in a village. You work in the field for days, but when harvest time comes, some of your crops spoil. You have to make sense of this loss. Sometimes nature doesn't provide enough explanation. It is precisely at this point that the story of the giants comes into play. People explained the disappearance of crops with their insatiable appetite. Thus, uncertainty transformed into a concrete figure. This way, fear also became manageable. In another village, war breaks out. The opposing side has stronger weapons, a larger army. The reason for the loss is not just numerical superiority. People associate it with descendants of the giants. They are the grandchildren of the giants, they say. Thus, the enemy's strength is interpreted not as an ordinary superiority, but as the continuation of a celestial curse. This interpretation feeds both fear and resistance, because while the story of the giants instills fear, it also increases the will to fight. It is possible to see this fighting spirit in the lines written by the scribes. They did not portray giants only as cursed beings. They also emphasized that fighting giants was a sacred duty. No matter how great the giants were, humanity had to overcome them. This narrative gave communities the strength to resist, because fighting giants was not just a physical struggle, but also a moral stance. Consider the fairy tale a mother tells her child. She tells him how the giants attacked villages, but at the end of the story, she always says that a human or a hero defeated the giants. Thus, the child grows up not only with fear, but also with hope. Although the existence of giants shows humanity's helplessness, their defeat reminds us of human strength. The story of the giants was therefore not just a warning, but also an encouragement. It reminded people, no matter how great it is, every power can be defeated. But for this, one must know their limits and stand in the right place. Because the fall of the Watchers began with the crossing of boundaries. The birth of the giants was also the result of the same boundary transgression. Therefore, what humanity had to do was to know its own limits. Looking back today, perhaps giants seem unreal to you, but what they convey is still current. Humanity still admires power, but also fears the dangers that power brings. Humanity is still hungry for knowledge, but also sees the destructive side of knowledge. The story of the giants has not been forgotten for this reason, because that story tells of humanity's unchanging contradiction. Beside of the stars you see when you look at the sky, you also see your own Desiras. The giants were precisely the projection of these Desiras onto the heavens. Their insatiability reminded humanity of its own greed. Their power showed humanity's own desire for power. Their destructiveness reminded humanity of what could happen when it forgot its own limits. And now, as I close this section, I leave you with a calm question. Did the story of the giants truly belong to the lineage of celestial beings, or was it a projection of humanity's own Desiras and fears onto the heavens? Perhaps the giants never existed. Perhaps they were humanity's own shadows. And humanity, when it looked at the sky, saw not only the stars but also its own shadows. Now I want to take you to a different time and a different place. Imagine it, people sitting on the ground in a village square. Eyes are turned to the sky, everyone's gaze fixed on the same point, the newly born crescent moon. Children are silent, women are curious, and men watch carefully without blinking, because the appearance or non-appearance of that crescent is not just an ordinary event happening in the sky. It is the sign that determines the time for sowing the day of celebration, the beginning of the Sabbath in their lives. That crescent is so important that it can change the order of a society from beginning to end. That's why the calendar was at the center of life for the people of that era. One of the most interesting sections of the Book of Enoch is the part known as the astronomical book. This section describes the movements of the sun, moon, and stars. It might seem ordinary to you today, because for us modern people, opening a calendar or seeing the date on a phone screen is a matter of a second. But for people living thousands of years ago, the calendar was a secret learned by observing the sky. And this secret was not just about measuring time. This secret was a bridge that connected the sacred with the mundane. For a farmer living in a village, the calendar was a matter of life and death. When to sow the seeds, which day to irrigate, when to start the harvest. The answers to all these questions were hidden in the sky. Seeds sown at the wrong time would not root before the rain and would wither away. A harvest done at the wrong time would rot the crops. That's why observing the sky was not just curiosity. It was life itself. But the issue was not only about agriculture. Religious life was also teed to the sky. For Jewish communities, celebrating festivals, Sabbaths, and holy days on the correct dates was very important. A shift of one day could disrupt the entire order. So observing the sky was not just a farmer's job. Scribes, priests, and even ordinary people would lift their eyes to the heavens, searching for the signs of time. The Book of Enoch responded to this need. The astronomical book describes the points of sunrise and sunset. The sun's shift to different positions throughout the year indicated the changing seasons. The phases of the moon were recorded one by one. Which month would last how many days, and which tasks would be done in which phase were written down. The alignment of the stars also held a special significance, because some stars heralded the beginning of seasons. For example, the appearance of a constellation in the east would signal the approach of rain. Now close your eyes and imagine a scribe. A parchment is on his table. With his reed pen, he records the movements of the moon, line by line. A small lamp burns beside him. In the flickering light of that lamp, every letter is carefully written. The scribe is not just writing, he is also observing, because what he writes will determine the order of society, on which day people will fast, on which day they will celebrate, depends on his lines. That is why the astronomical book was seen not as an ordinary calendar text, but as sacred knowledge. But do not think of this knowledge only as a practical guide, because the Book of Enoch linked these calculations to a celestial order. The movement of the sun and moon was not just a natural cycle, but part of a divine order. That is, the sky was a reflection of the order created by God. The watchers were tasked with observing this order. They recorded the movement of the stars, the phases of the moon, the movement of the sun, and people maintained both their daily lives and their religious lives by learning this order. Think of a village evening. People are sitting around a fire. An elder points to the sky and tells the children, "Look how the stars shift. This is a sign that the season is changing." This secret is the knowledge of the watchers. The children do not forget these words as they grow up. For them, the sky is not just a landscape, but also a calendar, a teacher, a source of order. But there's an interesting detail here. There were different views among societies regarding the calendar. Some arranged the calendar according to the movement of the sun. Others looked at the phases of the moon. This difference led to discussions within society. Some celebrated the festival a day early, others a day later. Such divisions could even lead to major disagreements. This is where the Book of Enoch intervened. It proposed a more comprehensive order by combining different celestial signs. The movement of the sun, the phases of the moon, and the position of the stars were made part of a single calendar. It is possible to see traces of this discussion in the lines written by the scribes. While some parchments gave great importance to the phases of the moon, others described the movement of the sun in more detail. These differences show that the calendar was not just a practical matter, but also a subject that determined the identity of communities. Because the order of time meant the order of society. For a farmer, a wrong calculation meant hunger. For a priest, a wrong calculation meant the desecration of a holy day. For a society, a wrong calculation meant the overturning of order. That is why observing the sky and accurately calculating the calendar became one of the most important tasks of life. And that is why the astronomical book was seen not just as a calendar, but also as a hidden secret. Because those lines contained not only the calculation of days and months, those lines contained the order of God. Those lines contained the knowledge of the watchers. And this knowledge reminded people not only of time, but also of their limits. Now, at the end of this section, I leave you with a calm question. When you look at the sky, do you see only the sunrise, the phase of the moon, the movement of the stars? Or is there a greater order, a deeper meaning behind them? Perhaps when you look at the sky, you see not only time, but also humanity's own place. Because the calendar measured not only days, but also human existence. Let's continue to dwell in the world of people who measured time by observing the sky. In the previous section, you recall how vital the calendar was. Now, let's consider how those calculations led to disagreements, discussions, and new interpretations in society. Because while the sky offered a single view, different eyes read that view differently. In one village, when people saw the crescent moon, they declared the new month had begun. This determined the day of the festival. But in another village, people looked at the sun and calculated the days according to its movement. Thus, the same festival would be celebrated at a different time in one place and at another in a different place. Perhaps this might seem like a small detail to you, but in that era, such differences could lead to serious conflicts in society. Because the order of time meant the order of society. Imagine a people gathered in the village square. Some say the moon has just appeared. Others claim that it is not yet time, looking at the sun's position. Voices rise. People argue. Because a shift of one day meant the disruption of the sacred order. This is where the Book of Enoch comes in. That book proposed a more holistic order by combining different signs from the sky. The movement of the sun, the phases of the moon, and the position of the stars were made part of a single calendar. Traces of this unification can be seen in the scribes' lines. They were not just recording the sky, but also trying to regulate society. Because the lines they wrote determined which day people would sow seeds, which day they would fast, which day they would celebrate. That's why astronomical calculations were not an ordinary task, but a sacred duty. Imagine a scribe standing outside the village at night. He looks at the sky, measures the position of the stars. He jots down notes on his parchment with his reed pen. In every line, not only the order of the sky, but also the order of society is written. He is not just an observer. He is also a guardian of order. That's why these sections in the Book of Enoch were called the knowledge of the watchers, because the watchers were tasked with observing the sky, and the scribes followed in their footsteps. But this knowledge was not accessible to everyone. Some communities considered the calendar a secret knowledge. According to them, this secret should not be in everyone's hands. because if used incorrectly, order could be disrupted. That's why some parchments were hidden in clay jars, and some calculations were shared only with selected individuals. Observing the sky was also a source of power, because knowing the time meant guiding society. Imagine what happened when a wrong calculation was made in a village. Farmers sow seeds at the wrong time. The seeds dry out before the rain comes. The crop is lost. Hunger knocks at the door. People get angry, blame each other. All of this stems from a calculation error. That's why reading the sky correctly was a vital responsibility in people's eyes. The Book of Enoch presented this responsibility as part of a celestial order. But still, I want you to ask yourself this question. Was observing the sky and calculating the calendar really just a practical task? Or was there a deeper meaning behind this work? Perhaps observing the sky was a way for humanity to understand its own place, because the shifting of the stars, the phase of the moon, the movement of the sun reminded humanity. You too are a part of this order. Your life also flows within this cycle. Now, at the end of this section, I leave you with another question. If the measurement of time was so important, then why did different communities create different calendars? Was this a disagreement or a natural result of diversity? Perhaps every eye that looked at the sky saw a different order according to its own needs. Although the sky was one, people interpreted it in different ways. And perhaps the real mystery lay in this diversity itself. We have discussed how calendars led to disputes in society. Now let's delve a little deeper. Because observing the sky and calculating the days was not merely a practical necessity. It was also a part of identity, belonging, and belief. Measuring time was, in fact, a way of defining oneself. For an ordinary person living in a village, the calendar was an invisible guide that shaped their life. What work to do in the morning, which day to celebrate a festival, when to fast, all depended on the calendar. A wrong calculation could lead not only to hunger, but also to social unrest. That is why observing the sky was not an ordinary task in people's eyes, but almost a sacred duty. It is possible to see this seriousness in the lines written by the scribes. They were not only recording the sunrise and the moon's phases, they also saw the order established by God behind these calculations. The sun rising every morning, the moon reappearing every month, the cyclical movements of the stars were, for them, a sign of a divine plan. And understanding this plan was considered humanity's duty. Imagine a night. A thin crescent moon is in the sky. The scribe watches it carefully. A small apprentice sits beside him. The apprentice asks curiously, "Master, why do we look so carefully every month?" The scribe smiles and says, "Because this is not just the rising of the moon. This is God reminding us of time. If we don't see these signs, we lose the order of our lives." This was the meaning behind the calendar, but the calendar reminded not only of order, but also of boundaries, because as humanity observed the sky, it became aware of its own place. It saw how small it was next to those stars and cycles. The flow of time reminded humanity of its own transience. Perhaps that is why dealing with the sky was not just a calculation, but also a form of contemplation. The use of different calendars in societies was therefore not just a technical debate. It also showed the difference in identities. One community lived according to the lunar calendar. Another based its life on the solar calendar. This difference also determined how they defined themselves, because the way time was measured also shaped how life was lived. The celebration of a festival a day earlier or a day later might seem like a small detail when viewed from outside. But for that society, its meaning was great, because the time of the sacred could not be shifted. That is why Challenger debates were actually debates about faith and identity. The Book of Enoch answered these debates with a celestial authority. It presented the movements of the sun, moon, and stars as part of the order established by God. In a village, people are gathered around a fire. They look at the sky. An elder tells the story of the watchers. They recorded the order of the stars, and we follow in their footsteps. When people hear these words, they feel that their own observations are not just a task, but a sacred duty. This gives them both confidence and responsibility. But there is another dimension here. The calendar not only measured time, but also built connections between communities, celebrating the same festival on the same day, fasting on the same day, brought people together. The calendar transformed into a silent but powerful tool for social unity. That is why disagreements over the calendar also threatened the integrity of society. Now I leave you with a calm question. Was observing the sky and measuring time really just a matter of calculation? Or was it a way for societies to define themselves? Perhaps what was seen when looking at the sky was not just the movement of the stars. Perhaps what was seen when looking at the sky was humanity's search for its own identity, its own place, and its own boundaries. Now I want to bring you down from the sky to the earth, because the most interesting story of the Book of Enoch is not just about what is written within it, but also about the journey of those writings themselves. For thousands of years, the lines of this book passed through different hands, were rewritten in different languages, sometimes hidden, sometimes lost, and sometimes forbidden. The destiny of a book became intertwined with the memory of humanity. In this section, I will tell you about that journey. Imagine on old parchment lying on a dusty table in a room. The parchment is opened under a flickering light. The letters are somewhat faded but still readable. A scribe leans over the lines, carefully copying each mark, because he knows that what he is writing is not an ordinary text. It is a trace on earth of knowledge from heaven. The journey the Book of Enoch has undertaken throughout history is filled with such moments. Its first traces appear in the Qumran caves. Among the parchments discovered in the caves carved into the cliffs on the western shore of the Dead Sea were fragments belonging to the Book of Enoch. These fragments show that the book was known and read in the Ekine century BCA. That is, people at that time already knew the story of the Watchers, the birth of the giants, and the calculations of the heavens. These lines were not merely a religious curiosity, but also a part of daily life, because people remembered these lines. When looking at the sky and drew strength from these texts when measuring time, why did the Qumran community hide these texts? The answer to this question was hidden in their understanding of life. They saw themselves as an elect community, awaiting the end of the world. For them, the Book of Enoch was a guide for this waiting. The fall of the Watchers, the birth of the giants, and the calculations of the heavens were, in their eyes, the key to understanding the future. That is why the parchments were placed in caves, put into clay jars, and kept away from the eyes of outsiders. But the journey did not end there, because far from the dusty caves of Qumran, in the mountainous regions of Africa, the Book of Enoch found another life. In Ethiopia, it was preserved as a complete text written in the Gayas language. Today, the complete version of the Book of Enoch exists only in this language. This shows us something. The survival of a text sometimes depends on the memory of unexpected geographies. If this text had not been preserved in Ethiopia, perhaps today we would only know the Book of Enoch in fragments. The Ethiopian Church accepted the Book of Enoch as a sacred text. For them, this book was a part of celestial secrets and human destiny. The story of the Watchers, the birth of the giants, the Challenger calculations, all of these became intertwined with their religious life. When lines from this text were read during a ceremony, people felt as if they were looking at the sky, because for them, these lines told not only of the past, but also of the future. But in other parts of the world, the same book experienced a different fate. In Jewish tradition, the Book of Enoch was not included among the official sacred books. For them, this text was too dangerous, because the fall of the Watchers and the teaching of forbidden knowledge contradicted official doctrines. A similar situation occurred in Christianity. In early periods, Enoch was quoted, but over time, this text was pushed into the background. Churches considered it dangerous because people could arrive at different interpretations by reading these lines. Now, think. The same text is hidden in one society, considered sacred. In another society, it is concealed, even forbidden. What does this show us? The fate of a book depends as much on its content as on the people who interpret that content. The Book of Enoch is therefore not just a text, but also a mirror of humanity's different memories. Imagine a scribe. He is sitting in a monastery in Ethiopia. On old parchment is in front of him. He copies it line by line. He carefully goes over every word, because he knows that if this text is lost, the trace of the secrets from heaven will also be lost. At the same time, in another part of the world, a cleric finds this book dangerous and wants it forbidden. The journey of a book is filled with such contradictions. Today, we have fragments of the Book of Enoch in different languages: Greek fragments, Hebrew sections, Aramaic pieces. But the complete text exists only in Ge'ez. This shows us something. History does not always proceed in a straight line. A text can be lost, forgotten, but can find life again somewhere else. The journey of the Book of Enoch is filled with such zigzags. Imagine you live in a village. You only have a fragment of a parchment in your hand. A few lines on the fragment speak of the fall of the Watchers. The people who read those lines explain the changes they see in their own lives. In another village, there is another section of the same text. Calendar calculations are written there. The people of that village draw strength from those lines as they observe the sky. So even if the text is incomplete, its fragments still guide people's lives. Now, at this point, I want to leave you with a calm question. Where is the true value of a text hidden? In its lines, or in the effect those lines create in people's lives? Perhaps the greatest secret of the Book of Enoch is not only in the story of the Watchers or the giants, but also in the resonance it created in different societies. Because a book is reborn not only at the moment it is written, but also at every moment it is read. Perhaps what you see when you look at the sky is not just the stars. Perhaps behind those stars lies a memory that has been hidden and rediscovered for thousands of years. The journey of the Book of Enoch is the silent witness to that memory. When you think about the journey of the Book of Enoch, from the caves of Qumran to the mountains of Ethiopia, perhaps the most striking thing is this: the same text was understood in completely different ways in different societies, taking on completely different roles. In one place it was hidden, in another it was considered sacred, and in yet another it was met with suspicion. But amidst all these differences, there was one common thread. The Book of Enoch was never completely lost, because people felt that those lines spoke to them. Why did the Qumran community heed these texts in caves? Because they saw themselves as a community awaiting the end of the world, the fall of the Watchers, the birth of the giants, and the secret calculations of the heavens were, in their eyes, signs of the approaching end. That is why the parchments were carefully written, placed in clay jars, and kept away from the eyes of outsiders. A scribe, copying those lines, was not just writing. He was also leaving a message for the future. Perhaps he was telling people he would never know. This is what we thought. This is what we believed. But while these texts were silently hidden in the cliffs of Qumran, in another corner of the world, in the mountains of Ethiopia, other scribes were copying the same lines. For them, the Book of Enoch was not just a text, but a secret that God had left for them. The stories of the Watchers were read in rituals. The fall of the giants was expressed in sermons, and calendar calculations became a part of daily life. Thus, the Book of Enoch became an inseparable part of the sacred book for the people living there. At the same time, in other societies, this text was pushed into the background. In Jewish tradition, the Book of Enoch was not included among the official sacred texts, because the Watchers, giving forbidden knowledge to humans, and the birth of giants contradicted their teachings. A similar process occurred in Christianity. In the early periods, Enoch had been quoted. There were even references to this book in the New Testament. But over time, churches deemed this text dangerous. They thought that people could arrive at different interpretations by reading these lines, and the Book of Enoch was slowly pushed into the background and even forbidden. But what is forbidden is never entirely forgotten. What is forbidden continues to live on in other ways. The Book of Enoch was like this. It was hidden in one place, sanctified in another, and forbidden in yet another. But in all cases, it left a mark on people's minds, because the story of the Watchers, the birth of the giants, and the secrets of the heavens continued to awaken humanity's curiosity. Imagine you live in a village. You have an old parchment in your hand. It's fragmented, some letters are erased, but it's still readable. You read those lines aloud. People gather around you. For them, these lines are not just a text, but an explanation of their own lives. They associate the delay of rain, the outbreak of war, the drying of the fields with these lines. Perhaps for you, this is an ordinary reading, but for them, it is a mirror held up to the order of the universe. Think of a scribe sitting in a monastery in Ethiopia. A large book is in front of him. All the sections of Enoch are written inside. He carefully turns the pages. He leans over every line, because he knows that if this book is lost, a memory will also be lost. That is why he copies it, preserves it, passes it on to the next generation. In his hands, not just a book, but also a memory lives on. But in another part of the world, a cleric looks at the same book with suspicion. For him, the Book of Enoch is a dangerous text that can lead people astray. That is why he forbids it, tries to eliminate it. The journey of a book is filled with such contradictions. In one place, it is considered sacred, while in another, it is found dangerous. But in all cases, the same thing happens. That book continues to be talked about. Today, we have fragments of the Book of Enoch in different languages. Aramaic fragments, Greek fragments, Latin quotations. But the complete text survived only in the Ge'ez language. This shows us something. History sometimes preserves its memory in unexpected geographies. Perhaps a text forgotten in Jerusalem survives in the mountains of Ethiopia. Perhaps a line forbidden in the West is read in rituals in the East. The fate of the Book of Enoch is the most striking example of this zigzag journey. Now I leave you with a calm question. Where is the true value of a book really hidden? In its official acceptance, or in its continued existence in people's memories? Perhaps the greatest secret of the Book of Enoch is not only in the story of the Watchers, but also in how it was hidden, how it was forbidden, and how it was preserved. Because a text gains meaning not only in the moment it is written, but also in every moment it is read. Perhaps what you see when you look at the sky is not just the stars. Perhaps behind those stars lies a memory that has been hidden, preserved, and passed down for thousands of years. The journey of the Book of Enoch is the silent witness to that memory. When you consider the journey of the Book of Enoch from the Qumran caves to the mountains of Ethiopia, perhaps the most striking thing is this. The same text was understood in completely different ways in different societies, taking on completely different roles. In one place it was hidden, in another it was considered sacred, and in yet another it was met with suspicion. But amidst all these differences, there was one common thread. The Book of Enoch was never completely lost, because people felt that those lines spoke to them. Why did the Qumran community hide these texts in caves? Because they saw themselves as a community awaiting the end of the world. The fall of the Watchers, the birth of the giants, and the secret calculations of the heavens were, in their eyes, signs of the approaching end. That is why the parchments were carefully written, placed in clay jars, and kept away from the eyes of outsiders. A scribe, copying those lines, was not just writing. He was also leaving a message for the future. Perhaps he was telling people he would never know, this is what we thought, this is what we believed. But while these texts were silently hidden in the cliffs of Qumran, in another corner of the world, in the mountains of Ethiopia, other scribes were copying the same lines. For them, the Book of Enoch was not just a text, but a secret that God had left for them. The stories of the Watchers were read in rituals. The fall of the giants was expressed in sermons, and calendar calculations became a part of daily life. Thus, the Book of Enoch became an inseparable part of the sacred book for the people living there. At the same time, in other societies, this text was pushed into the background. In Jewish tradition, the Book of Enoch was not included among the official sacred texts, because the Watchers giving forbidden knowledge to humans and the birth of giants contradicted their teachings. A similar process occurred in Christianity. In the early periods, Enoch had been quoted. There were even references to this book in the New Testament. But over time, churches deemed this text dangerous. They thought that people could arrive at different interpretations by reading these lines. And the Book of Enoch was slowly pushed into the background and even forbidden. But what is forbidden is never entirely forgotten. What is forbidden continues to live on in other ways. The Book of Enoch was like this. It was hidden in one place, sanctified in another, and forbidden in yet another. But in all cases, it left a mark on people's minds. Because the story of the Watchers, the birth of the giants, and the secrets of the heavens continued to awaken humanity's curiosity. Imagine you live in a village. You have an old parchment in your hand. It's fragmented. Some letters are a Z, but it's still readable. You read those lines aloud. People gather around you. For them, these lines are not just a text, but an explanation of their own lives. They associate the delay of rain, the outbreak of war, the drying of the fields with these lines. Perhaps for you, this is an ordinary reading, but for them, It is a mirror held up to the order of the universe. Think of a scribe sitting in a monastery in Ethiopia. A large book is in front of him. All the sections of Enoch are written inside. He carefully turns the pages. He leans over every line, because he knows that this book is valuable not only for him, but for his entire community. If those lines are lost, a memory will also be lost. That is why he copies it, preserves it, passes it on to the next generation. In his hands, not just a book, but also a memory lives on. But in another part of the world, a cleric looks at the same book with suspicion. For him, the Book of Enoch is a dangerous text that can lead people astray. That is why he forbids it, tries to eliminate it. The journey of a book is filled with such contradictions. In one place, it is considered sacred, while in another, it is found dangerous. But in all cases, the same thing happens. That book continues to be talked about. Today, we have fragments of the Book of Enoch in different languages. Aramaic fragments, Greek fragments, Latin quotations. But the complete text survived only in the Ge'ez language. This shows us something. History sometimes preserves its memory in unexpected geographies. Perhaps a text forgotten in Jerusalem survives in the mountains of Ethiopia. Perhaps a line forbidden in the West is read in rituals in the East. The fate of the Book of Enoch is the most striking example of this zigzag journey. Now I leave you with a calm question. Where is the true value of a book really hidden? In its official acceptance, or in its continued existence in people's memories? Perhaps the greatest secret of the Book of Enoch is not only in the story of the Watchers, but also in how it was hidden, how it was forbidden, and how it was preserved. Because a text gains meaning not only in its lines, but also in its journey. What we see in the journey of the Book of Enoch is not just the history of a text. It is also the story of how memory is kept alive. Because no book survives on its own. It continues to exist in the hands and decisions of the people who preserve it, copy it, hide it, or forbid it. And that is exactly what happened to the Book of Enoch. On one hand, there were fragments hidden in clay jars in the Qumran caves. These fragments managed to reach us despite the dust of time and the desert winds. If those scribes hadn't written, if that community hadn't hidden it, today we might not have known anything about the Book of Enoch. But they wrote, copied, and hid it. That's why we can read these lines today. On the other hand, there were monastic communities living in the mountains of Ethiopia. They included the Book of Enoch among their sacred texts. For centuries, they preserved that book, copied it, and read it in their rituals. Perhaps it was forgotten elsewhere, perhaps forbidden, but in Ethiopia, that book survived within a chain of memory. And because this chain was not broken, today we have the complete version of the Book of Enoch. But remember this. In other parts of the world, the same book was pushed into the background. Even attempts were made to destroy it. It was excluded from the official canon in Jewish and Christian traditions. Because the fall of the Watchers and the birth of the giants were disturbing to official doctrines. There was a fear that people might read this text and arrive at different meanings. That is why the Book of Enoch was hidden, forbidden. But what is forbidden never completely disappears. What is forbidden lives on in other ways. The Book of Enoch did the same. Today, you have a book in your hand, and that book carries the traces of lines written thousands of years ago. This shows you the value of a text is not in its official acceptance, but in its continued existence in people's memories. Because a book is alive as long as it continues to be read. It is lost the moment it is forgotten. The Book of Enoch was not forgotten. It lived on, even in fragments, in different languages, in different societies. Imagine someone living in a village. They have only a few lines in their hand. As they read those lines, they make sense of the problems in their own life, the difficulties of their own society. In another village, there is another fragment. Calculations are written there. Those lines also guide the people of that village. So even if the text is incomplete, people continue to derive meaning from it. This is the true power of a book. It can continue to live, even when it is fragmented. Now I leave you with a calm question. Where is the true value hidden in the journey of the Book of Enoch? In its lines, or in the echoes those lines, created in people's lives? Perhaps the greatest secret of this book is not in the story of the Watchers and Giants, but in its own story, because those lines tell not only of the sky, but also of human memory. And perhaps what you see when you look at the stars is not just an order. It is also a memory hidden, preserved, and passed down from generation to generation. Like the lost and rediscovered lines of the Book of Enoch, human memory continues to live in the depths of the sky. Now, I want to take you to knowledge that changed human life, but also caused fear. Among the things the Watchers taught humans when they descended to earth in the Book of Enoch, 3 topics particularly stand out: magic spells, the art of metalworking, and the secrets of writing. Understanding how this knowledge, which seems ordinary to us today, created a great rupture for people living thousands of years ago, is actually understanding one of the most silent revolutions in human history. Imagine people sitting around a fire in a village square. They lead their daily lives with simple tools: stone knives, bone needles, orally transmitted songs and tales. But one day, someone sees a stone melt and glow in the fire. That melting stone takes shape, and iron replaces stone. Somewhere else, someone tries to influence another by whispering strange words. People call this magic. And in another community, those who discover that signs can be combined to represent sounds make words permanent. These 3 pieces of knowledge, working metal, learning magic, and discovering writing, completely changed humanity's life. The Book of Enoch states that this knowledge was taught to humans by the Watchers. They descended from heaven and gave humans forbidden knowledge. The reason it was called forbidden was that this knowledge brought not only benefit, but also danger. Because knowledge is power, but it can also disrupt order. The knowledge given to humans by the Watchers contained precisely this dual nature. Let's start with metals. Imagine the first appearance of an iron tool in a village. The farmer gen now plow the land faster with this new tool. The hunter gen more easily catch his prey with an iron-tipped spear. But at the same time, the warrior gains superiority over his enemy with this new weapon. Metal becomes not just a tool, but also a power that changes social balances. Iron, copper, bronze, working these metals opened a new era for humanity. But it also created inequality. If one village had this knowledge, it could gain superiority over another. The Book of Enoch's description of the Watchers defining this knowledge as forbidden is understandable for this reason, because the power brought by metal was uncontrollable. Magic also carried a similar dilemma. People tried to influence each other with words, signs, herbs, or stones. Some used this knowledge for good, to heal illnesses, to ward off evil spirits. But some used the same knowledge to scare, deceive, or control others. Thus, magic became a source of both hope and fear in society. A mother might use magic to protect her child, while another could use the same knowledge to harm her neighbor. That was precisely the nature of forbidden knowledge. People decided how to use it. As for writing, it was perhaps the greatest change, because writing made the oral permanent. Before, songs, tales, and rules were carried only by memory. But with writing, these became permanent. When scribes began to put marks on parchments, humanity began to rely not on memory, but on texts. This fundamentally changed the structure of societies. When a rule was written down, it became indisputable. When a date was recorded, it became unforgettable. Through writing, societies grew, and orders became permanent. But writing also led to the concealment of knowledge, because few knew how to write. That knowledge remained in the hands of the chosen. That's why writing brought both salvation and limitation. Imagine you live in a village. You have a stone tool in your hand. You try to plow the land, but the stone easily breaks. Then you get an iron tool. You feel your work getting easier at that moment. But, at the same time, you are afraid, because the neighboring village also has the same tool, and they might use it as a weapon against you. This knowledge, therefore, brings both hope and threat. Consider another scene. At night, in the village square, a woman raises her hands to the sky, whispering strange words. People watch her in silence. Some believe she is warding off evil spirits. Some fear her because they think the words she speaks will bring harm. Magic was like that, on unseen but felt power. And finally, think of writing. A scribe makes marks on his parchment. Every line he writes goes out like a message to the future. But the ordinary people living in the village don't know what those marks mean. When the scribe speaks, everyone listens, because writing is only in his hands. This knowledge organizes society, but it also sets limits, because the power of writing is not in everyone's hands. The Book of Enoch described this knowledge as forbidden by the Watchers, because this knowledge, as much as it empowered humanity, also corrupted it. Humanity worked metal, but at the same time, it escalated war. Humanity learned magic, but at the same time, it increased fear. Humanity discovered writing, but at the same time, it limited knowledge to a group. That is why the knowledge of the Watchers was two-faced, both salvific and destructive. Now I leave you with a calm question. Was this knowledge taught to humans truly a gift from celestial beings, or was it a product of humanity's own curiosity and intelligence? Perhaps the story of the Watchers was a way of explaining humanity's relationship with knowledge, because knowledge has always brought both hope and fear. Let's continue to delve a little deeper into how this forbidden knowledge taught by the Watchers resonated in daily life, because magic, metals, and writing were not merely technical advancements or ordinary discoveries. They were things that changed the fabric of society, reshaped people's relationships with each other, and even opened up moral boundaries for discussion. Imagine you live in a village. The stone tools you used yesterday are now put aside. A master forge is the iron he has melted in the fire and turns it into a knife. That knife makes plowing the field easier, catches animals more quickly during hunting. But the same knife turns into a weapon in the midst of a fight. People attack each other with it. It is precisely at this point that knowledge begins to walk a fine line between benefit and danger. That's why there is a constant warning in the lines written by the scribes. This knowledge will make your life easier, but it will also lead you to ruin. Magic, on the other hand, created a completely different dilemma. A woman whispers prayers by her sick child's bedside, burning a mixture she made from herbs in her hands. People believe this wards off evil spirits. In the same village, someone else speaks the same words for a different purpose, to harm a neighbor for their own gain, to spread fear. Thus, magic becomes a two-faced tool. On one hand, healing and protection. On the other, fear and threat. That's why what the Watchers taught is considered forbidden, because people themselves decided how to use that knowledge. Writing also carries a similar contradiction. At first glance, writing makes knowledge permanent. A song is no longer forgotten, a law is no longer debated, a history is no longer lost. But writing also limits knowledge, because those who cannot write are deprived of those lines. When the scribe takes the parchment in his hand, everyone's eyes turn to him, because he becomes the sole carrier of knowledge. While writing strengthens memory, it also creates unequal access to knowledge. In a community, there are a few people who know how to write. They write the rules of society. The line they write becomes indisputable because it's on paper. But those who don't know the meaning of writing cannot ask why that rule was written that way. This situation creates a new distinction in society: those who know and those who don't. The Book of Enoch, therefore, found the Watchers teaching writing to humans dangerous, because writing became a tool that, as much as it made knowledge permanent, also restricted it. Imagine a people gathered in the village square one night. An elder tells how the Watchers gave these forbidden pieces of knowledge to humans. People listen in silence. Some see this knowledge as a blessing, others as a curse, because everyone has seen both the benefits and the harms of this knowledge in their own lives. A farmer gets more crops thanks to an iron tool. But in the same village, another man is killed with an iron sword. A woman believes she cured her child with magic, but another woman thinks her family was harmed because of magic. Through writing, the community gains order. But those who don't know how to write realize their own voices are not heard. That's why forbidden knowledge has always remained two-sided in the memory of societies. It was neither entirely sanctified nor entirely rejected. It was a reflection of human nature itself, because humanity was hungry for knowledge. But at the same time, it struggled to bear the burden that knowledge brought. This tension is very clear in the lines of the scribes. On one hand, what the Watchers taught is described. On the other, their fall is mentioned. The person reading these lines understands knowledge is dangerous. If you control it, it brings salvation. But if you cannot control it, it leads to destruction. Now I leave you with a calm question. Were these forbidden pieces of knowledge taught by the Watchers truly secrets brought by celestial beings, or were they a projection of humanity's own discoveries onto the heavens? Perhaps melting iron, uttering magical words, or discovering writing belonged to humans. But these innovations were so powerful that people saw them as descended from heaven rather than believing they came from within themselves. Because bearing such a great change was not easy, let's continue to feel the weight of the forbidden knowledge taught to humans by the Watchers. Because this knowledge did not remain only in the legends of ancient times, it resonated throughout every period of human history. Working metals, practicing magic, discovering writing. All three continue to be at the center of our lives. But behind all of them lies the same question. Did this knowledge save us, or did it make our burden even heavier? Let's start with iron and other metals. When humanity learned to smelt iron, it truly opened the door to a new era. Agriculture became easier, Cities grew, roads were built. But from the same metals, swords were forged, chariots were produced, armies were formed. Thus, metal became a tool of both bounty and death. Even today we see this tension. From the same minerals, buildings rise, machines are made. But from the same metals, weapons are produced, wars break out. The contradiction of the knowledge taught by the Watchers is still with us. Let's move on to magic. For ancient people, magic was a way of understanding and controlling the unseen. Magic was performed to heal illnesses, ward off evil spirits, and influence natural phenomena. But at the same time, magic could be used to harm others and spread fear in society. Today, we use the word magic in different ways. We can explain many things through science, technology, and psychology. But our fear of the unknown still continues. We still believe in the power of words and symbols. We still liken the influence of the human mind to magic. This means that magic did not just stay in ancient times. It still lives within humanity. And writing, perhaps the greatest turning point among what the Watchers taught. Thanks to writing, the spoken word became permanent. Humanity carved its own memory into stones, tablets, parchments, books, and finally screens. Writing became the foundation of civilization. But writing also created division. The difference between those who could write and those who couldn't gave rise to new classes in societies. Knowledge accumulated in some hands, while others were left out. Even today, access to knowledge continues to be a source of power. A sentence written on the internet can change the lives of millions of people. A signature on a document can determine the fate of millions. The power of writing still carries the weight of forbidden knowledge. The Book of Enoch described this knowledge as forbidden, because as humanity learned to use them, it also forgot its limits. Metal made humanity powerful, but at the same time, it killed. Magic gave hope, but at the same time, it frightened. Writing brought order, but at the same time, it created inequality. Perhaps this is why the story of the Watchers was told. Humanity can gain knowledge, but knowledge can be heavier than humanity can bear. Now close your eyes and think about your own life. You have a phone in your hand. Your computer screen is in front of you, full of writing, full of light, full of information. This is an ordinary thing for you. But for a person living thousands of years ago, this would be the most advanced form of forbidden knowledge taught by the Watchers. Even today, we are faced with the same question. How do we use the knowledge we have? Do we use it for the benefit of humanity or for our own destruction? There is actually not much difference between the people sitting around a fire in a village square listening to the story of the Watchers and you reading these lines in front of a screen today. They also confronted knowledge, and so do we. They also felt the allure and danger of forbidden knowledge, and so do we, because knowledge always carries the same dilemma. It is both savior and destroyer. And now, at the end of this long journey, I leave you with one last question. Was the forbidden knowledge taught by the Watchers truly secrets from heaven, or was it a story told by humanity to lighten the burden of its own discoveries? Perhaps the answer doesn't matter. Perhaps what truly matters is this. What does humanity do with knowledge? Does it use it to grow life or to prepare its own downfall with its own hands? When you look at the sky, you see your own curiosity, your own fear, and your own desire alongside the stars. The story of the Watchers is actually your story, because forbidden knowledge is at the center of your life today, just as it was in the past. And perhaps the real secret is this: there is no such thing as forbidden knowledge. What is truly forbidden is for humanity to forget its own limits and use knowledge uncontrollably.